Moreover, as long as you are identified with your mind, the ego runs your life, as I pointed out earlier. Because of its phantom nature, and despite elaborate defense mechanisms, the ego is very vulnerable and insane, and it sees itself as constantly under threat. This, by the way, is the case even if the ego is outwardly very confident. Now remember that an emotion is body's reaction to your mind. What message is the body receiving continuously from the ego, the forced mind-made self? Danger. I'm under threat. And what is the emotion generated by this continuous message? Fear, of course. Fear seems to have many causes: fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being hurt, and so on. But ultimately, all fear is the ego's fear of death, of annihilation. To the ego, death is always just around the corner. In this mind identified state, fear of death affects every aspect of your life. For example, even such a seemingly trivial and normal thing as the compulsive need to be right in argument and make the other person wrong, defending the mental position with which you have identified, is due to the fear of death. If you identify with a mental projection, then you are wrong. Then if you're wrong, your mind-based sense of self is seriously threatened with annihilation. So you, as the ego, cannot afford to be wrong. To be wrong is to die. Wars have been fought over this, and countless relationships have broken down. Once you have disidentified with your mind from your mind, whether you are right or wrong makes no difference to your sense of self at all. So the forcefully compulsive and deeply unconscious need to be right, which is a form of violence, will no longer be there. You state clearly and firmly how you feel or what you think, but there will be no aggressiveness or defensiveness about it. Your sense of self is then derived from the deeper and truer place within yourself, not from the mind. Watch out for any kind of defensiveness within yourself. By making this pattern conscious, by witnessing it, you are disidentified from it. In the light of your consciousness, the unconscious pattern will then quickly dissolve. This is the end of an arguments and power games which are so corrosive to relationships. Power over others is weakness disguised as strength. True power is within, and it is available to you now. So anyone who is identified with your mind and therefore disconnected from their true power, their deeper self rooted in being, will have fear as their constant companion. The number of people who have gone beyond mind is as yet extremely small, so you can assume that virtually everyone you meet or know lives in a state of fear. Only the intensity of it varies. It fluctuates between anxiety and dread at on one end of scale, and a vague unease and distant sense of threat at the other. Most people become conscious of it only when it takes on one of its more acute forms. The ego's search for wholeness. Another aspect of the emotional pain that is an intrinsic part of egoic mind is a deep-seated sense of lack or incompleteness, of not being whole. In some people, this is conscious, in others, unconscious. If this is conscious, it manifests as the unsettling and constant feeling of not being worthy or good enough. If it is unconscious, it will only be felt indirectly as an intense craving, wanting, and needing. In either case, people will often enter into a compulsive pursuit of ego gratification and things to identify with in order to fill this hole they feel within. So they strive after possessions, money, success, power, recognition, or a special relationship basically so that they feel better about themselves, feel more complete. But even when they attain all these things, they soon find that the hole is still there. And this it is bottomless. Then they are really in trouble because they cannot delude themselves anymore. Well, they can and do, but it gets more difficult. As long as the egoic mind is running your life, you cannot truly be at ease. You cannot be at peace or fulfilled except for brief intervals when you obtained what you wanted, when a craving has just been fulfilled. Since the ego is derived sense of self, it needs to identify with the external things. It needs to be both defended and fed constantly. The most common ego identifications have to do with possessions, the work you do, the social status and recognitions, knowledge and education, physical appearance, special abilities, relationships, personal and family story, belief system, and often also political, nationalistic, racial, religious, and other collective identifications. None of this is you. Do you find this frightening, or is it a relief to know this? All of these things you'll have to relinquish sooner or later. Perhaps you find it as yet hard to believe, and I am certainly not asking you to believe that your identification cannot be found in any of these things. You'll know the truth of it for yourself. You'll know it at the latest when you feel death's approaching. Death is stripping away of all that is not you. Death is a stripping away of all that is not you. The secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death. End of Delusion of Time. It seems almost impossible to disidentify from the mind. We are all immersed in it. How do you teach a fish to fly? Here is the key. End the delusion of time. Time and mind are inseparable. Remove time from the mind and it stops unless you choose to use it. To be identified with your mind is to be trapped in time, the compulsion to live almost exclusively through the memory and anticipation. This creates an endless preoccupation with the past and future, an unwillingness to honor and acknowledge the present moment and allow it to be. The compulsion arises because the past gives you an identity and the future holds the promise of salvation or fulfillment in whatever form. Both are illusions. But without a sense of time, how do we function in this world? There are no goals to strive toward anymore. I wouldn't even know who I am because my past makes me who I am today. I think time is something very precious, and we need to learn to use it wisely rather than waste it. Time isn't precious at all because it is an illusion. Okay, what you perceive as precious is not time, but the one point that is out of time, the now. This is precious indeed. The more you are focused on time, past and future, the more you miss the now. The most precious thing there is. Why is it the most important thing? First, because it is the only thing. It's all there is. The eternal presence is the space within which your whole life unfolds, the one factor that remains constant. Life is now. There was never a time when your life was not now, nor will there ever be.